We began our exploration of my grandfather of blessed memory's magisterial work, Alei Shur, which we translated as On Top of the Ramparts. And we did just the introduction, or the beginning of the introduction, which talked about the idea that there's a thick wall that separates the world of Torah from the outside world. And there could be people who are religious, who are observant, who are orthodox, who are even in the halls, the hallowed halls of the yeshiva, and are unaware of the majesty and the wondrous transformation happening inside those thick walls. And we talked about how the Torah has the power, maybe even the mandate, to transform humanity, to take a person and to turn them into something else. And to elevate, we had the analogy of a skyscraper. Every person is a skyscraper, and you start off at the lowest level. And your job, your mandate is to unlock every element of your potential, to reach the top. You have to ascend. And that's done via Torah. And this book, it starts off, as he writes, it starts off as a trip on the ramparts. There's this wonderful world, this rich and vibrant and dynamic world of transformation via Torah that's happening in those thick walls. And with this book, we're going to go on the ramparts, and we're going to examine every aspect of what that world is all about. And maybe once we finish the book the first time, we climb down from the ramparts and we try to find maybe a gate, an entrance, a portal where we can ourselves enter and participate and join the ranks of the people who are really utilizing Torah to transform themselves into something very different and very great. That was the upshot of the introduction. And the book is divided up into 4 different gates, like entrances. And they're almost like 4 different books, because if you read them, they're talking about different things, and the whole style is very different in each one of these 4 sections. And it starts off from the easiest, and it progresses steadily, sequentially to more and more advanced levels. Now, there's a general introduction to the whole book, and then each section, each gate has its own introduction. And what I want to do today is I want to omit maybe the general introduction and begin with the introduction of the first gate, the first section of this book, Alei Shur, Volume 1, authored by my saintly grandfather, Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe. And I want to begin today covering this introduction to the first section. And again, as I mentioned last time, I'm very much considering going through this book in a very rigorous and comprehensive way, and maybe even doing a whole podcast series on Alei Shur. But I need your input. Should we do it? Should we not? Should we just pick and choose, do a few chapters here and there, or should we do it in a proper way? You let me know, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. Okay, so we're in Volume 1, and we're in section number 1 called The First Gate. You remember, there's a wall. There's this vibrant universe, and we're trying to enter, or at least we're examining the first element, the first gate. And this is the introduction of the first gate, the first section. And he begins talking about 2 great Greek philosophers. In the city of Athens, in the streets of Athens, there was a man who was flanoring around. And he stopped every citizen and asked them the same question. How to live? Ketzad lachyot, how to live? And this was the question he asked everyone. And he continued to ask every day of his life. Every person that he met, the same question. How to live? What's the appropriate way to live our lives? We have options. We have different ways that we can live, different values, different priorities, different goals, different objectives. how to live. And of course, this person is very famous. This is the greatest of the nations. This is, of course, Socrates. And of course, this is the Socratic method. Lots of questions and probing and challenging assumptions and how do we know what we know and so on. Okay. There was another man in a different time who also was in Athens. And he used to walk around with a lantern in his hand in midday. He walked around with a torch, with a fire midday. Now, typically you would do that at night, right? When it's dark, you need to have some artificial illumination. But he would do it midday. And they asked him, why are you holding a torch? Why are you holding a lantern? And he would respond, I'm looking for a proper person, for a perfect person, for an honest person, for an honest man. Now, in this chapter, he doesn't identify. My grandfather does not identify who this person is, but it's well known. This is Diogenes the Cynic. He was the one who eliminated all excesses from his life. He was the one who said, I don't need anything. Just give me a cup so I could drink some water. And then he saw a boy drinking with his hands. I don't even need the cup. And he eliminated that too. He's the one carrying the lantern in midday, looking for a perfect person, for an honest person. This is what happened in Athens. There they asked how to live. There they used artificial light to discover, to find, to identify an honest person, a perfect person, a refined person, a complete person. In Jerusalem, there was no need for this. Everyone knew how to live. Everyone knew many examples, myriads of examples of perfect people, of refined people, of honest people, of wholesome people, of complete people. How to live. We have that, of course. That's the Torah. The Torah itself tells us that you follow the mitzvos, the chukim, which is the statutes and the laws, asher ya'aseh osam ha'adam v'chai bahem. A person doesn't just do the mitzvos. The Torah tells us, this is in Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 18. The Torah says that the purpose of mitzvahs is not just things that we do. They're not ceremonies that we fulfill. V'chai bahem, you should live with them. The Torah is a comprehensive guide to living, how to live life. The Creator, Almighty God, who created all of existence, meaning all of created existence, He created life, and He also gave us the instruction manual for how to live life to the max, how to live life in the best possible fashion, how to avoid all the common pitfalls of life. And there's so much in Torah. There's so much guidance. There's not a single part of life or a single circumstance or situation that the Torah does not give clear guidance from God how to live. And in the book, he uses a very poetic language. The vessel of our life is insufficiently big to be able to encapsulate all the guidance of Torah. The Almighty bestows upon us so much guidance for how to live. We don't have the capacities, the faculties to be able to encompass it all. But in our life, in every way we turn, we see an immense volume of guidance, of direction, how to live, how to speak, how to act, how to behave, how to think. There is no empty, vacuous moment for someone who lives a life of Torah. Socrates is trying to find some direction, asking everyone, we have the answer. Jerusalem has the answer. Diogenes, the cynic, he's taking his lantern, walking around, trying to find out one person. Is there one person free of flaws? Is there one perfect, refined, complete person? We don't have to look very far. We don't have to take a torch or a lantern to go find such a person. Our whole history is full of countless examples. And in the book, he goes through history. He said, well, from Moshe all the way through all the prophets to the end of the prophets. And once the era of prophecy ends, you have figures like Ezra, like Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, Rabbi Judah the prince, Abaya and Rava, the authors of the Talmud, the Rambam, Maimonides, the Ramban, Nachmanides, the Gaon of Vilna, the author of the Shulchan Aruch Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Chafetz Chaim, who lived in modern times, the Chazon Ish, as well, passed away in the 50s. We have a Torah. The Torah that gives us the instructions for how to achieve perfection. And we see living examples. Perfect people. Throughout the whole history, the whole gamut, the whole span of our history, we have countless examples, even today, in every generation. And he says, well, I just gave you a sample of names, going from Moshe all the way to modern times. And these are more famous exemplars of their generation. They became famous with their writings, with their actions. But they weren't individuals. These weren't the only examples. There were thousands, myriads of people throughout our history who were perfect, who didn't have any flaws, who were great. Where did that come from? I remember I once heard a lecture many years ago. Wow, I can already say that. I guess I'm old enough to say it was many years ago. It was about 20 years ago. And it was in the great hall of the academy in Jerusalem that I was privileged to attend. This was the Great Mir Yeshiva. And one of the heads of the yeshiva, Rabbi Finkel, now Finkel, a lot of Rabbi Finkels there, Rabbi Aryeh Finkel, he's no longer with us, but he was a remarkable person. But he was saying something. He said, you meet people who live a life of Torah and actually follow it, not just as a checklist of what to do, ceremonies to fulfill, but Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life, and follow the instructions for every part of every behavior and every thought and every word. Everything's guided and directed by Torah. And you examine them and you don't find a single flaw. And that's not the way humans are. We're complicated, and we're a mixed bag, and we have good and bad. And you meet people who you can't find any bad. Where are the flaws? And the answer is, well, the Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life, that is what made such a person. And I will tell you this, and I've said this in the past. I know literally dozens and dozens of people that you don't find these people outside of Torah. There's just no flaws. Refined in every possible way. Where does that come from? It comes from Torah. The Almighty said, I will create a human who is complicated, got a Yetzer Hara, got all these different whims and desires and impulses. But I will give you a Torah that will make you perfect. And that's true in times of Moshe. It's true today. It's still possible. And we see it. The proof is in the pudding. You see people, and the only way you have such a phenomenon, well, that's with Torah. And even today, we too can know how to live. And each and every one of us can become a perfect, refined person, a complete person. And he cites the Rambam. The Rambam writes this in one of his less famous works. He also writes the same idea in his Laws of Repentance. Kol echad mi bnei olam. He doesn't limit this to Jews. Any person in the world. Imratza hashlemus, if they want perfection, they can achieve perfection like that of Moses. Moses, our teacher, Moses, our master, peace be upon him. We have Torah. And if you know how to live as guided by Torah, and you actually do it, actually do it, you will achieve that perfection. And then he tells us, very important, Torah, it's not just abstract analysis, detached study. Torah is called Torah's Chaim, the Torah, the guidance for life, how to live. And in this way of Torah, where it's not just something abstract, distant, detached, rather it's the Torah of life, study and implementation must always be interlinked. One without the other is incomplete. If you just have implementation without Torah, you're going to go awry. If you just have Torah without implementation, you're going to go awry. The Torah's Chaim is when the Torah and life blend together, enmesh together, and become one. That is the secret. To answer the question that in Athens they were mystified by, but in Jerusalem, everyone knew the answer. Amongst the nations, they're all trying to decipher the riddle, the enigma of life. And of course, there's studies, and there's research, and there's investigation, and there are sciences and philosophies. What is the world all about? What's the purpose? What's the goal? What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? And amongst the nation, they can develop a worldview, a Weltanschauung, a perspective on the world. And that perspective can even at some points arrive at some sort of practical fulfillment of an ideal. But sometimes it can remain completely abstract without any practical guidance for how to live day-to-day life. This is not Torah. Torah is not a world view. Torah is the guidance, is the wisdom, is the divine instructions and directives for how to build the world, for how to build the world of man. And he cites the Talmud. The Talmud talks about builders. What's a builder? A builder is a Torah scholar who are building the world. And this idea, of course, on one level, it means that God wants to partner with us in Genesis. This is a more macro meta idea. Genesis was almost complete. It was complete, but there's something left for us to do. The Almighty carved out a role for us to play, to use our ability, our intellect, our will and willpower, and our Torah to be able to finish Genesis, to perfect ourselves, to rid ourselves of our flaws. And thus we have a say, so to speak, in determining what happens in the world and with created existence. And we can partner with God in fulfilling and completing Genesis. The role of a Torah scholar is to build the world, to build themselves. And that's what Torah is. Torah is not a worldview. It's the wisdom and the guidance and the directives for building the world of man. This is the first part of the introduction to the first gate, meaning the first section of this book. And the next part is going to kind of expand this idea of the Torah of life and how it fits into the bigger picture of the book. There are two stages that a person must traverse through before they fulfill their aim. If you want perfection, you want comprehensive, complete perfection, what do you do? So, of course, we said we have Torah, right? You have Torah. Well, what's Torah? Torah is the guidance for living. Well, how exactly does the guidance for living bring me towards my perfection? There are two stages. Stage number one is to enter the world of Torah. You recall, the introduction tells us we're on the ramparts, right? We're examining this world of Torah. There's this thick wall that separates the world of Torah from the outside world. And we could climb on top of the ramparts and look in and examine what's happening inside there. What's this wondrous world that's unknown to everyone outside of its thick walls? The first step is to enter that world. What does that demand? What must you forego? What must you forfeit in order to enter the world of Torah? It demands that you must forfeit and forego lots of personal whims and desires. And it's very similar to enlisting in the army. What happens when someone enlists in the army? Well, they take away their civilian garments, right? They give him a uniform. And he turns into like a number. What happened to his personality? What happened to his individual expression? It seems to be taken away from him. What about he has his whole agenda? What he wants to wake up at a certain time? No. He wants to do something else, different from what the sergeant wants him to do. Doesn't matter. Your personal will is reduced, is eliminated. And there's this whole daily cycle, your basic training, where none of what you want to do matters. You follow the orders. There are superiors who tell you what to do. And that is not permanent, right? At a later stage, once a person gets acclimated to the military way of life, there are all sorts of different avenues that they can take. Once they become a soldier, there are different avenues that they can take to advance their military career and to find their particular strengths, their individuality, and use that or find the proper path for someone with their particular skill set. That's what happens when someone is enlisted. Our people are called the armies of God. Scripture calls us that, the book of Exodus. Right after the Exodus from Egypt, Parshas Bo, the nation is called the armies of God. That's the essence of our nation. It's an army of God in this world to fight on his behalf, so to speak, to advance knowledge and awareness of God in this world. And this world also means within ourselves, right? Man is a mini world. And we are, so to speak, we're fighting to impose the will of God upon ourselves. When we enter that world, when we cross over those thick walls, that threshold that separates the world of Torah from the outside world, the first step is becoming a service member in the army of God. When someone accepts the yoke of mitzvos, as it is known, they are enlisting in the army of God. And now they only listen to the orders of their master, their sergeant, so to speak. Who's in charge now? God. But I want to do this and that and the other. No. Your own personal whims must be set aside. You will listen only to the instructions, to the directives of your master with a capital M. Part of it is putting on a uniform. We have a mitzvah Torah to put on tzitzis, to wear tefillin. These are garments. Why are we doing that? Because we're a soldier enlisted in the army of God, and we're wearing the uniform. And if the uniform says you got to put fringes on the corners of your garments, and you got to wear the tefillin on your head, upon your arm, opposite your heart, that's what you do. And you have weapons. You have a sword. You have a bow. When Jacob was talking about his conquest of the city of Shechem, this is towards the end of the Torah, think it's towards the end of Genesis, chapter 48 of Genesis. He says, I took the city of Shechem becharbi ubekashti, with my sword, with my bow. The uncleist translation is with my prayer and with my Torah. What are the weapons that we are assigned as we enlist? We're cadets in God's army: Torah and prayer. And we have to follow orders. We follow orders how to behave. And for the second time in this introduction, we're told that means not just what you do, but what you say, and even what you think. The three dimensions of our activity: our physical activity, our verbal activity, and the activity of our mind. That's the first step. That's the first stage. But once someone becomes acclimated into the service of God, and it may feel initially stifling because you have to forego all the things that you want to do. But once you become acclimated, you find a lot of fulfillment and meaning in being a soldier for the Creator. And you discover that actually this wasn't the reduction and the elimination of my individuality, and it wasn't being lowered, and it wasn't a demeaning experience. My personality was not snatched away from me. Actually, the opposite happened. You found yourself. You discover yourself, who you truly are, in a much more profound and real way. And just as after the soldier becomes acclimated, there's different paths that they can take and different ways they can find expression for their own individuality, their own unique collection of skills, of talents, of abilities, of gifts. Once someone becomes regulated in their service of God, there are many, many different options for how to ascend. That's stage number 2. Stage number 1 is become a service member, which is almost like you divest of your own individual whims and you follow orders. And once you become comfortable with that and you actually enjoy it and you discover yourself, oh, now I discover myself. Okay, well, how do I find my particular path of ascent? That's the process of elevation. And that's done via a ladder. There are certain stages. Stage number 1, that's to become a service member of God. Well, what's stage number 2? That's going to depend on who you are, on what your makeup is, what your individual gifts are. And this is one of my grandfather's favorite ideas. And I did find in my exploration of his writings that he wrote more about it in his earlier years, and over the course of time, it seems to me that he wrote about it less and less, maybe because it's too demanding of an idea. The idea is finding a ladder of your own. We have a hard enough time entering those thick walls. Like we're maybe a bit uneasy where we're going to take this trip over the ramparts, but are we actually going to enter the hallowed walls, the hallowed gates of the world of Torah? And that's only the first stage, because you got to become a service member. And we would like to draft dodge, maybe. I don't want to be told what to do. We have built in revulsion, resistance to being told what to do. That's because we have a Yetzer Hara, we have a foreign God. There's some other force that's resisting submitting itself to God. But even once you do that and you're comfortable there, okay, well, how do I find my unique individual path of ascent? My grandfather used to collect many different examples from the sages, even from the sages of the Talmud and the Mishnah. But even the later sages, there's many different examples of ladders of ascent. So the one he starts off with, there's the famous ladder of Rabbi Pinchas, son of Yair, the Talmud, the book of Avodah Zarah. I think it's on page 20, 20b. It talks about how Torah brings to zehirus, which is like fastidiousness or meticulousness. And that brings to alacrity and to nikios and precious and so on, step following step, all the way until you become a prophet. How do you become a prophet? Well, there's a certain progression. We got to follow step following step. And this, of course, is a very famous ladder because there's a very famous book known as Mesilas Yesharim, Path of the Just, or Way of the Upright, which is a whole book on this ladder. Torah brings to Zehirus. Well, what's Zehirus? What are the different components? How do you earn it? How do you progress from Torah to Zehirus, to Zerizus, to Nikias, and so on? That's in the Talmud. And the Rambam, he has his ladder of ascent. The Ramban, in his famous letter, the whole letter is designed as a ladder of ascent. You go from one thing to the next. And there are many, many examples of this. And then he writes, drops a bomb, this book, this volume is a ladder of ascent. You recall that there are 4 different gates in the book. These are 4 different stages. The first gate is life of Torah. Again, this is the introduction to the first gate. How to live, how to become a perfect person. That's the Torah. Well, what do you do that? How do I enter? How do I enter that gate of living life as designed, as directed by Torah? That's the first stage. The second section, that brings l'chinuch atzmi v'avodah, self-development and service of God. That's the second section. And that brings us to the third section. To become a wellspring of renewal. We don't know what that means quite yet. That's the third section, which is the most famous section of this work. And from there to the fourth section, Kedushat HaChaim, the holiness of life. And then he cites the Talmud, Mimidbar matana, mimatana nachliel, uminachliel bamos, which you read that, it won't make any sense to you. But it is a citation of a verse in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 21. It's talking about where the nation traveled from the wilderness to Matana, and from Matana to Nachliel, and Nachliel to Bamos, and so on. And it seems like it's just talking about the different encampments where the nation traveled from one place to another place. But the Talmud tells us that this is a description of how to go from stage to stage. And the Talmud of the book of Eruvin, on page 54a, tells us that these words are not just descriptions of places. Midbar, the Midbar is a wilderness, a desert. From there, you go to Matana. Matana means a gift. Says the Talmud, that's a description of a certain progression. If you make yourself into a desert that everyone can trample upon, then Torah will be given to you as a gift. Meaning, when the verse seems to be talking about just the itinerary of the nation, where they traveled from. Oh, they were in the wilderness, and they went to a place called Matana. And from there, they went to a place called Nachliel. And from there to Bamos. Says the Talmud, no. You're reading it very simply. There's a whole philosophy, a whole approach, a whole ladder of ascent in this seemingly innocuous verse talking about the itinerary of the nation as they wandered. Mimidbar, from the wilderness, from the desert, Matana. If a person makes themselves, they self-abnegate to such a degree that they're like a desert, everyone can trample upon it, then they will get the Torah as a gift. Umi Matana, from that, Nachliel. The word Nachliel means an inheritance from God. They'll inherit from God. Or they'll be God's inheritance. And from there, Bamos means like a like a stage or a height or some sort of elevated platform. Once someone God has made it his inheritance, whatever that means, we don't know quite what that means, then they could reach greatness. The idea of you start off being low, you're like someone who is enlisting in the army and you self-negate. And then you get Torah, and then you advance to Nachliel and to Bamos and so on. Okay, this first gate, is the gate of the entrance into the world of Torah. B'tza'adim zehirim, with careful steps and with weighted words. How do you become someone who accepts the terms of Torah and submits themselves to God and becomes like a soldier who walks away, who forgoes or seemingly forgoes their individuality and says, I want to follow the directives of God? That is the content of this section. And remember, this is not a worldview. This is not abstract, detached study. The only way to really understand it is if you implement them. So in this section, we're going to learn about how to become a servant of God, how to become a service member, a soldier of God, how to make yourself into a midbar, a desert that anyone can trample upon in order to earn Torah as a gift. To do that, you have to implement it. So we could read it, and that's wonderful. We can examine it on the ramparts, but if you want to actually make it work, you have to implement it in actuality. And then he tells us this is a general rule in all of Torah. To really understand something, you must do it. You must bring it into the realm, into the dimension of action. And then he has a very short sentence with a very profound point. This, he tells us, this is the secret that the angels employ. That the generation of knowledge, i.e. the generation that left Egypt, that got the Torah, when they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, they understood this particular point, the secret of the angels. Now, what does he mean? Of course, we know, before Sinai, the nation said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Wow, a very famous adage, a motto, a maxim of our people. Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Typically you say, well, let me understand. I don't want to sign the line that is dotted unless I know what the terms are. That's prudent. Our nation said, we will do and then we will listen. We're committing blind. That's how it's typically understood. Like the nation has such trust and reliance on God that they said, okay, we're in. We accept. My grandfather, in this very short sentence, he's saying there's a much more profound point. What they were saying, the secret of the angels, is that the only way to understand is to do. Now, I said we will do, and then we'll understand. Because I could say it to you a million times, we could learn a million times, you don't do it, you won't understand it. And that's a general principle in Torah, and that's the secret of the angels, that the generation of knowledge, the generation that received the Torah, they understood that the only way to truly understand is to do, is to implement. This is the secret of what our sages tell us, Ein hamidrash ikar ela ha'ma'aseh. The study is not the most important part, it's the doing. So again, this doesn't mean only that doing is more important than studying. It means that even with understanding, the more critical part to understanding is to implement than to even study it. It's not like there are two things. You study and then you do. And it's important to do. Don't just study. Don't make it abstract. Don't make it just theoretical. Do it. No. Deeper point. Even with regards to understanding, a more important part in order to develop understanding is to do it than to study it. Because only with action will the concept become clear and crystallized. Through the action, you'll understand the deep, internal, hidden secrets and power of Torah and mitzvos. With every idea in Torah, every true idea in Torah, there should be a lab on the side. A lab to see, does it actually stand up? And that is life. Life is the laboratory of Torah, where you take the wonderful ideas in Torah and you implement them in your laboratory. Life is the laboratory of Torah. That is the way to enter into the world of Torah. That's how Torah enters life. And that's how we live via the Torah. And then we'll understand it. And then it'll become true in our heart. And he ends off with a verse from Psalms. Lule hamanti l'tzvutov Hashem, if I did not believe to see in the goodness of God, be'eretz chaim, in the land of life. Torah must be in our life. That's stage one of our ladder. That's gate number one of our book. That is the beginning. That's the answer to the question that stymied and mystified the great Greek philosophers. In Athens, they didn't know the answer. In Jerusalem, they knew, and we too can know and learn the secret for how to become a great person, a perfect person. The secret is Torah, not just Torah study, but Torah implementation, Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life. This is the conclusion of the introduction to the first gate, the first section of the first volume of Alei Shur. Should we do this further? Do you want to hear more? Send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. Again, as I told you, I'm considering launching another podcast on this subject. I'm not promising to do every single chapter, but to really get a flavor of this wonderful book. And by the way, there's 2 volumes, volume 1, volume 2. So there's a lot to study and to learn. And again, not just to study and to learn, but to implement. Let me know what you think. rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.